Nice to see you all. Thanks for having me here. We're not going to use so much statistics now as we have done before during the day, but we're going to look at the things behind the statistics, how a university can work with these questions described here today. I work at Malmö University in Sweden. I work mostly with international relations for both students and research. But as you will see later in the presentation, widening recruitment, as we call it, is something that comes in all aspects of our work at the university. Yeah, that's the title of it. So for those of you who don't know where Malmö is, it's a small 268-hour walk from Belgrade. It's in the south of Sweden, there. So I'm kind of tired today. I walked that distance during the past week. I was also asked to do a little bit of a vocabulary for this presentation since Ivana read my presentation and said this will be questions about this. So a wide participant is not a student with a few extra kilos. It is one person from the group we call wide participation. So I might use that. It's not an actual term. It's just a word that I might use during the presentation. The other one is Swede or Swedish, and that is a person who eats rotten fish and drinks Absolut vodka. No, it's not. It's someone who has a Swedish nationality. So even though I might talk about people coming from foreign countries in my presentation, they are all technically Swedish. All right? Good. So let's start. So we have a classic definition that has been used in Sweden for a long time. It's two categories. The first and most common used one is social background, which is a direct translation, which actually comes down to parents' educational background. And that has been discussed a lot today, and in the Swedish definition it is parents. We make the line if they had secondary education, so gymnasium, you guys have gymnasium as well, right? But no higher education, that's like the line. The other thing that is being discussed actually at the moment, because it's not really a good indicator in the way, is foreign background. And when it comes to foreign background, it's actually divided into two different ways of looking at it. So one is that you yourself are born abroad and then moved to Sweden and are now a Swedish citizen. The other one is if you have two parents who are from another country outside of Sweden, but you are born in Sweden. But to give you an idea about how the discussion is going about that, I've actually going to show some stats. But they're Swedish stats, so they're not the same as we've seen before. So this is a list of people born abroad who started university in 2016-17, who were born abroad, all right? So this is for the same year, but it is people whose parents are born abroad. So if you look at this, it doesn't really say anything about widening recruitment. It says a lot about where people immigrated to Sweden in the past came from, and present, but it doesn't really say much about widening recruitment, because your parents can be from Turkey, but they can both be professors. So then you're not part of that social group, and that is something that we have a new legislation that is coming on, where we are looking to actually get rid of this for the future. But those two are the classic definitions. So I'm going to start by giving a history of widening participation in Sweden. So we started a little earlier than the EU. In 1990, when the industry, as we knew it in Sweden, was dead, we started to see that there was an underrepresentation of students with non-Swedish background and with non-academic background in higher education. And to deal with that, there was a huge national funding, something called the Open University, and the target was that 50% of students from the age 19 to 25 should be involved in higher education in Sweden by 2001. The focus at that time was aspiration, recruitment, and access to to higher education. And I should add that there is no tuition fees for studying in Swedish universities. It used to be free for everyone, but as of 2011, if you're not a European Union member, you have to pay. So that is also why people are not living at home in such big numbers as in Serbia, for example. In 2005, it was finally put down in the law that widening participation in higher education institutions shall also actively promote and widen recruitment to higher education. So it's not nice to have, it's something that you have to do. Institutions can still choose how they do it, but they should do it. In 2007, we got a new government from a different political camp. You can all guess where they were from, because widening participation was off the agenda. There was no funding, there was no incentives. As a response to this, some of the universities in Sweden started something called the Include Network, which is a network for universities working with these questions more actively. In 2014, we finally got a new government, and the widening participation was back on the agenda. The focus now had changed from the previous ones in 2001 to retention, which we have discussed a lot today, recognition of prior learning, which I understand is a hot potato in Serbia. And just to give you like an idea of how that's done in Sweden, there's a reason why it came back so hard on the agenda in 2014, and that was because if you were to work as a school teacher in middle school or in high school, you needed to have a license for what you were teaching. And coming from that background myself, I used to work as a history teacher, but I would be called in every now and then, and why don't you teach chemistry? So a lot of people came to schools, they finished their university, and they said, well, we don't have a chemistry teacher. I know that you're in geography, but you can take chemistry. And then people continued to work for like 40 years doing that. And with this new law, that meant that those people would no longer be allowed to work in the subject that they have taught for many years, even though they have a teaching degree, just not in that subject. So that's when RPL came on the agenda. So especially teachers initially were allowed to prove their knowledge in the subject that they were teaching, and then they would be giving a diploma to teach in that subject. This has since spread over to other subjects as well. It's usually quite tied to practical kind of educations, but it's getting there. And if you apply to a course on bachelor or master level in Sweden, it will say like the criteria is academic merits, prior education, or other. And RPL goes under other. So you can actually take in people based on interviews as well, if there is a need. That was a long RPL one. Social background was also on the agenda this time. There was still no funding, but in 2015 we did a big national survey by our National Council for Higher Education. And as you can see, by 2016 we still haven't reached the goals for 2001, but we're getting there. All right. So as we have previously discussed today too, I think someone took up the incentives for why it's important to work with widening participation. And this is like without putting any years to it. These are like some of the trends in Sweden. So it started out with legislation, political trends, then we have the equal opportunities and social justice, democracy. I used to work for another university for 10 years, which is kind of a high-profile university, and in there it was to find the best, like the diamonds, the rough diamonds, the future Nobel Prize winners was in these groups. To increase the student numbers, because student numbers in Sweden actually sets the term for how much funding universities get. The more students you have, the more funding you get. To become less vulnerable, both as a university and as a nation. And what's the latest thing now is quality, that widening participation actually increases quality. And what quality? There's different perspectives and experiences in the classroom, just like society. So it contributes to better and deeper understanding, both of the subject and of society, obviously. It promotes the development of critical thinking. If you have a classroom where all the students come from academic background, the critical thinking is not as obvious as it could be if you had people from various backgrounds. So that's also a thing. It's better preparation for working life, because when you finish your university studies and go into working life, not everyone else is going to have the exact same degree as you or the same background. You might not even work in Sweden. So it's a very, very good thing to think about. The person who asked questions on how to justify it for university management, quality works. If the forms for teaching and learning can take advantage of the diversity, that's a very, very big if. And that leads me to what makes Malmö special in Sweden, because we are quite special in Sweden in this field. So widening participation was a mission for our new university when it first opened in 1998. It was one of the main pillars of our university. Of the population in Malmö, today 46% have a post-secondary education, and that's more than Sweden. But in 1991, when Malmö was, I don't know how to use a better word for this, but quite a crappy city after the industry closed, there was 21%. In 2002, we were up to 32%. And also still today, 2/3 of our students are female. That also goes for our PhD students, as someone asked before. The inequality, I mean, it starts at professor level. 1/3 of the students have a foreign background, and 2/3 of the students are first-generation academics, which is really cool. But it also matches the city that we're in, and that's important. So just to give you an idea, this is Malmö in 1995, and I have a colleague here, Alexandra, who worked for 6 months in Malmö. Can you imagine that the campus area looked like this? You have, yeah. So today it looks like this. So it's a big improvement for an industry city that we are very proud of. With that said, some things were better in 1995. Our football team had a better player, but you know. Not all progress is good progress. This is our new strategy, and as you know, strategies can sometimes be dry, to say the least. The reason I'm showing this is that because we, in 2018, actually became a full-flown university under Swedish standards. From an international perspective, we've been a university all the time, but this meant that we got 11 million-ish euros more for research. So you might think that we would turn towards research and forget our mission, but this is the first page. So the university should have education grounded in research in terms of teaching methods as well as subject matter, which provides the conditions for inclusive and student-active lifelong learning, which is something we try to live by. It's not only words. And to do that, you need to have an organization that helps you. And to do that, you need to have management, which we do, which we are really, really grateful for. They provide us with funding, not as much as we want, but you never get as much as you want. They also do follow-up, Q&A for everything. We have the Center for Teaching and Learning, which works with pedagogical development, support, and also research in widening participation. And if you're in the field, please do research and please do send it, because more research is needed in this field. We have the Department of Learning. They do outreach, complementary courses, academic support, evaluation, and also research. And we have the Student Center, where I'm working, where we have things like Student in the Center. I will take that on more on the next slide. What's important to remember, remember one thing, is that this is a long-term and regular mission. It should not be based on enthusiasts. It should not be in project form. And there should be procurement for this work. So, I'm not going to go through all of this. The important thing to see here is that when we talk about widening recruitment, we talk a lot about what we do before. So outreach, And we have seriously very, very good outreach programs at my university. So it's not that, but it's what you do during the time the students are there that really matters. So this line here is what's being done by the institution, faculty, central kind of the teaching and learning, and in research. And what's being done here is what we do at the Student Center. So there's a lot of focus on retention at our university, and we work mostly with widening recruitment during the studies. And that also helps if education is free, obviously. And this is also something to think about, that you know, as you saw, almost 50% of our students are from the group called widening participation. So instead of, if you have 50% of your student is part of that group, then instead of having individual solutions to compensate the individual, you should have general solution that includes all. Because that also helps students not to feel special in a bad way. And if you think you know it, then you can just close your ears and sit by anyway. Same goes for academic support. Instead of having it as a supplement to the ordinary activities, support is part of the curriculum. Everyone should know where support services are. Adaptation to normality. Instead, we should have diversity as a quality. And it's not an issue for the universities. It is a challenge for society. Good practice, that's not why I'm here, but it should be pedagogical enhancement and research, and it should be challenge-based learning. This should be a part of all the programs, at least on bachelor level. That's my opinion. Of course, it changes. The work that we do with wide participation changes. In 2015, we got a new migrant group from Syria. We received roughly 200,000 people in Sweden, and 50,000 of them landed in Malmö. So they become a new target group that we hadn't worked with before. And we were talking about risk group. Our biggest risk group, especially in the south of Sweden, but in all of Sweden, are actually white, young, unemployed Swedish men. Those are the ones that are in the biggest trouble, and those are the ones that's going to be in trouble in the coming 10 years. So apart from the incentives we discussed before with quality, it's still also democracy, human rights, and economics, and with this group to prevent the nationalist winds that are blowing all over Europe, I think, and the fundamentalist winds that are also blowing. So the new discourse that we are planning to bring into our university is democracy, inclusiveness, and diversity. And of course, there are pedagogical implications. So the teachers must have discussions on how to include themes as democracy and values in all educations. In some educations, it's very clear how to include it, but you brought up computer science before. How do you talk about democracy in computer science? But we do have groups of teachers working together with these things. And how to recognize the diversity and allow it to contribute. That is also a very good question that needs to be discussed on national level and on university level. So to sum up the success factors at our university, it's first of all to have a holistic approach to widening recruitment. Why are we doing it? It should be done on all levels as well. We have the support from management, which is crucial. We have an internal quality assessment group, or quality assessment, which is good, because often you say things like, yeah, we're going to do this, it's going to be so good for the students, but in the end, if you cannot prove what it actually does, it will get questioned, and you will get less funding for it. So to follow up is important. It's important to have engaged staff as well. And at our university, I'm very happy to say that we have that. It was not the same when I worked at another university. So that's also part of the culture. Motivated students, of course, we all have motivated students, but they need to be motivated for this work as well. Cooperation between faculties is key. Flexible ways of working, not just for teachers, but for students and for administrative staff. Not to be afraid to try new methods in all aspects of education. Partnerships outside the university. So, for example, my university work a lot with non-profit organizations, NGOs, Malmö City, the municipality. We have a very good program where we have a student from the university becomes a mentor for a middle school child for 6 months, preferably from an area where we don't see a lot of our students coming from. And of course, economic conditions to work with it again. So there is obviously always still room for improvement, and you will have to excuse me, the graphs are in Swedish. I will try to translate it as good as I can. We've been discussing this before, but this is the actual educations that people apply to and attend according to their parents' level of education. So as you can see in the very top is it's a kindergarten teacher. Then we have like a craft teacher, and then we have dentist hygiene. And in the way in the bottom we have medical doctor exam, architect, and psychology. So ideally, this is not so popular to say here maybe, but ideally it should be as engineering, because it's quite even. That didn't go home too well. There's also another problem, and that is that students who come from a foreign background study very different things than people who come from a Swedish background. So these first ones here you don't have to care about because they're extremely Swedish, but if we look at the ones that are kind of international, like veterinary and physiotherapist. I didn't know this. My brother is a physiotherapist. So I asked him, do you work with a lot of people from other countries in your work? And he said, there's one guy. And he's worked in 4 cities in Sweden. He's met one guy with a foreign background. On the other hand, if you go to a pharmacy, these two here in the bottom are pharmacists. There's basically no people from Sweden in those programs. For some reason. I don't know. But those are things that we could work with. What I will say, what's interesting findings that I didn't expect to find while I was reading the Swedish report is that most exchange students who go on exchange from our university abroad, are the ones born in Sweden with 2 foreign parents, which is good and interesting. Also, 25% of all new PhDs in 2016-17 had a foreign background. I knew that we had a lot of international PhDs, but I didn't know we had that many with foreign background, which is really fun. And actually, people who immigrated to Sweden before starting elementary school has the highest attendance by percentage at post-secondary education of all the groups in Sweden. All right. So, any questions and comments? No? Then voila. Thank you.